Hi, guys. Today we're going to be listening to Lesson 11, The Further Adventures of Toad, Part 2. Let's look at our vocabulary words that we'll be listening to in today's story. The first word is ecstasies. Ecstasies is a noun meaning intense joys or great joy. Number 2 is gaining on. Gaining on is a verb meaning getting near to someone or something you are pursuing. Also meaning kind of like gain or to gain on something. Number 3 is keenly. Keenly is an adverb meaning extremely, sharply, or eagerly. Number 4 is proposal. Proposal is a noun meaning an offer or a suggestion, such as like a request for marriage. Number 5, recklessly. Recklessly is an adverb meaning carelessly or unconcerned about the consequences or results of an action. And then number 6 is spirit. Spirit is a noun meaning the character of a person or the way someone feels or thinks, like a positive attitude. So let's look to see what we've learned so far. So what themes have we learned so far in The Wind in the Willows? We've learned and talked about friendship and loyalty, hospitality, responsibility, and irresponsibility. What literary tools have we learned so far in The Wind in the Willows? We've talked about dialogue. Dialogue, remember, is the words spoken by a character set off with quotation marks. Narration, remember, narration is like the background information about the story, telling us about the setting and the plot. Personification, remember, personification is where non-human objects or things get human characteristics, sort of like rat, mole, and badger and toad all talking and carrying on like they're real humans. Point of view is basically from whose eyes are we seeing and hearing the story. Usually in first person point of view, you're going to hear the words I, me, my, mine, whereas in the third person point of view, you're going to hear he, she, they, its. Those are kind of pronouns you might hear in the third person point of view. Perspective is whose eyes are we seeing the story through? Who do we get the most information from about how they feel in that part of the story, what they experience? That would tell us a lot about whose perspective we're hearing the story from. Theme is like a one-word answer, kind of telling us about the overall big picture of the lesson that we're learning. So here's the Willows countryside. Remember in the Willows countryside, in our last story, we've been hearing about Toad traveling on the canal. The canal is over on the west side of the Willows countryside, and here we can even see a little picture of the barge traveling up the canal until it reaches the river. So what do we know? What does conceited mean again? It means having a very high opinion of yourself, thinking that you are the best. So would you describe Toad as conceited? Why or why not? When you say if Toad is conceited or not, make sure to use the word conceited in your answer. So in our purpose for listening today, it's entitled The Further Adventures of Toad, Part 2. Toad is going to be even more conceited. So do you think he will continue to fool people? What do you think is going to happen in today's read aloud? So make that prediction. Listen for example of Toad acting conceited. and listen carefully to see if your predictions are correct. Toad on Horseback. Excuse me. Toad had traveled some miles, his horse and he was feeling drowsy in the hot sunshine when the horse stopped and began to nibble the grass. And Toad, waking up, just saved himself from falling off. He looked about him and found he was on a wide common. Near him stood a gypsy caravan, and beside it was a man sitting on an upturned bucket. A fire of sticks was burning nearby, and over the fire hung an iron pot. And from out of that pot came rich and varied smells. Toad was hungry. He looked the gypsy over carefully, wondering whether it would be easier to fight him or persuade him. So there he sat and sniffed and looked at the gypsy, and the gypsy sat and looked at him. So who remembers what a gypsy is? What about a caravan? Remember, gypsies are wandering people who originally came from northern India. A caravan is a large covered wagon that's used as a traveling home. Presently, the gypsy remarked, "Want to sell that there horse of yours?" Toad was completely taken aback. Nevertheless, the gypsy's suggestion seemed to smooth the way towards the two things he wanted: money and breakfast. "What?" he said. "Me sell this beautiful young horse? Oh, no. Besides, I'm too fond of him. All the same, how much might you be willing to offer me?" The gypsy looked the horse over. "Shilling a leg," he said briefly, and turned away. A shilling is a British coin. "A shilling a leg?" cried Toad. "If you please, I must take a little time to work that out." He climbed down off his horse and did sums on his fingers. And at last he said, "A shilling a leg? Why, that comes to exactly 4 shillings. That is simply not enough." "Well," said the gypsy, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make it 5 shillings, and that's more than the animal's worth." Then Toad sat and pondered. He was keenly aware that he was hungry and penniless. At last he said firmly, "Look here, you give me 6 shillings and 6 pence, and as much breakfast as I can eat. In return, I will hand over my horse." Toad buys breakfast. The gypsy grumbled, but in the end he counted out 6 shillings and 6 pence into Toad's open paw. Then he disappeared into the caravan and returned with a large iron plate. He tilted up the pot, and a stream of hot, rich stew gurgled onto the plate. Toad took the plate on his lap. He thought that he had never eaten so good a breakfast in all his life. When Toad had eaten as much stew as he possibly could, he got up and said goodbye to the gypsy and the horse. After receiving directions from the gypsy, he set forth on his travels again. As he tramped along, he thought of his adventures and how, when things seemed at their worst, he had always found a way out. Toad's pride and conceit began to swell within him. "Ho, ho," he said to himself, "what a clever Toad I am." He got so puffed up with conceit that he made up a song as he walked in the praise of himself and sang it at the top of his voice, though there was no one to hear it but him. "The world has held great heroes, as history books have showed, but never a name to go down to flame compared with that of Toad. The clever men of Oxford knew all that there was to be knowed, but they none of them know one half as much as intelligent Mr. Toad." The University of Oxford is a world-renowned university in Great Britain. Is knowed a word? The author is using humor here because he has just mentioned Oxford, a place where many intelligent people have studied. Excuse me. The song went on. The animals sat in the ark and cried. Their tears and torrents flowed. Who was it said, "There's land ahead"? Encouraging Mr. Toad. The army all saluted as they marched along the road. Was it the king or president? No, it was Mr. Toad. He sang as he walked and got more inflated every minute, but his pride was shortly to have a severe fall. After a while, Toad reached the main road, and there he saw approaching him a speck that turned into a dot, and then into something very familiar. "This is the life again," said the excited Toad. "I will hail my brothers of the wheel, and they will give me a lift." He stepped confidently out into the road, when suddenly he became very pale. His knees shook, and he collapsed. And well he might, for the approaching car was the very one he had previously stolen. He sank down in a miserable heap in the road, murmuring to himself, "It's all over." Have you ever heard the saying, "Pride goes before a fall"? So what do you think is going to happen? Toad thinks the jig is up. The motor car drew slowly near till at last he heard it stop just short of him. Two gentlemen got out and walked round the heap lying in the road, and one of them said, "Oh dear, here's a poor old thing, a washerwoman apparently, who has fainted in the road. Let us take her to the nearest village." They tenderly lifted Toad into the motor car and proceeded on their way. When Toad heard them talk so kindly, he cautiously opened first one eye, then the other. "Look," said one of the gentlemen, "she is better already. How do you feel now, ma'am?" "Thank you kindly, sir," said Toad in a feeble voice. "I'm feeling a great deal better." "Now don't try to talk," said the gentleman. "I won't," said the Toad. "I was only thinking if I might sit on the front seat there beside the driver, where I could get the fresh air full in my face. I should soon be all right again." "What a sensible woman," said the gentleman. "Of course you shall." So they helped Toad into the front seat beside the driver. Toad was now almost himself again. He sat up and tried to beat down the old cravings that rose up and took possession of him. "It is fate," he said to himself. "Why struggle?" And he turned to the driver at his side. "Please, sir," he said, "would you kindly let me try and drive the car? I should like to be able to tell my friends that I have had the privilege." The driver laughed at the proposal so heartily that the gentleman inquired what the matter was. When he heard, he said, to Toad's delight, "I like your spirit. Let her have a try." Toad scrambled into the seat vacated by the driver, took the steering wheel in his hands, listened with affected humility to the instructions, and set the car in motion. The gentlemen behind applauded, and Toad heard them saying, "Fancy a washerwoman driving a car as well as that, the first time?" Toad went a little faster. He heard the gentleman call out warningly, "Be careful, washerwoman," and this annoyed him, and he became angry. The driver tried to interfere, but the Toad made the car speed even faster. "Washerwoman, indeed!" he shouted recklessly. "I am the Toad who always escapes. Sit still and you shall know what driving really is." With a cry of horror, the whole party rose and flung themselves on him. "Seize him!" they cried. Yet another smash-up, courtesy of Toad. Alas! They should have remembered to stop the motor car before attempting to seize Toad. With a turn of the wheel, the toad sent the motor car crashing through a hedge. One mighty bound, and the wheels of the car were churning up the thick mud of a horse pond. Toad found himself flying through the air. He eventually landed on his back in the soft grass of a meadow. Sitting up, he could just see the motor car in the pond. The gentleman and the driver were floundering in the water. He picked himself up and set off running across the country as hard as he could. He ran till he was breathless and weary, and he had to go at a slower pace. When he had recovered his breath, he began to laugh. "Ho, ho!" he cried, in ecstasies of self-admiration. Toad, as usual, comes out on the top. Then he burst into song again. A slight noise at a distance behind him made him turn his head and look. Oh, horror! About 2 fields off, the chauffeur or driver and 2 large policemen were visible, running towards him. Toad sprang to his feet and pelted away again. "Oh my!" he gasped as he ran. "What a fool I am! What a conceited numpty!" Toad glanced back and saw that they were gaining on him. On he ran desperately. He did his best, but his legs were short. Ceasing to heed where he was going, he struggled on wildly, when suddenly the earth failed under his feet. The toad grasped at the air, and splash! He found himself head over ears in deep water. He had run straight into the river. Numpty is the Scottish word for idiot or fool. So you got to remember that the author, Kenneth Grahame, he was actually born in Scotland. Toad back on the river. Toad back on the river. Toad rose to the surface and tried to grasp the reeds, but the stream was so strong that it tore them out of his hands. "Oh my!" gasped poor Toad. If ever I steal a motor car again." Then down he went and came up spluttering. Presently, he saw that he was approaching a big dark hole in the bank, just above his head. As the stream bore him past it, he reached up with a hand and caught hold of the edge. Then slowly he drew himself up out of the water till he was able to rest his elbows on the edge of the hole. As he stared before him into the dark hole, some bright small thing twinkled in its depths. As it approached, a face grew up gradually around it, and it was a familiar face, brown and small, with whiskers. It was the water rat. So let's take some time to reflect on today's story. You're going to get out your ELA journals, and we're going to write a little bit. You're going to write your answer to the following question in your journals, and you must write at least 3 complete sentences. Be sure to use proper conventions of standard written English. Our question is, Toad is very conceited and irresponsible. Do you think Toad will ever learn from his mistakes? Why or why not? You have 2 sentence starters posted here. Toad will learn from his mistakes because, tell me why. Remember to use your own text evidence to support your answer. If you don't want to do that one, you can do the other one. Toad will not learn from his mistakes because, give us some really good reasons based on the story and use those text evidence to support your answer. Remember to pause the video while you write. Now that you've written, I want you to do a think, pair, share. I'm going to ask you a question, and I'll give you a minute to think about the question. Then you're going to turn to someone and discuss your answer. We won't have time to really call on anybody here to discuss, but maybe during our Zoom session later. At the end of the read aloud, Toad encounters Rat. Will Rat let bygones be bygones? Or is Toad too much of a rotten apple? So pause the video while you think about it and then discuss it with somebody that you're around. Our word work for today is recklessly. Everybody say the word recklessly with me. Recklessly. In the story today, Toad shouts recklessly when he reveals that he is not a washerwoman, but the Toad who always escapes. Recklessly is when someone does something carelessly without thinking how it will affect themselves or others around them. For instance, Jimmy recklessly climbed the maple tree, even though the branches looked like they might break at any moment. So over the past few days, you've heard about the adventures of Toad. What kinds of things have you heard that recently that he has done recklessly? Be sure to use the word recklessly in your answer. So what's the word we've been talking about? The word is recklessly. And what part of speech is recklessly? Do you remember? An adverb telling you how, when, or where somebody acted or did something. Adverb. Okay? Well, that's all for today. Remember to keep working hard and try to learn something new.